In the race for governor, 5 Democrats on the ballot took the stage tonight in Milwaukee for their first and only debate ahead of the August 11th primary, now just 2 weeks away. They agreed on a lot of things, but also disagreed on how to regulate data centers and provide property tax relief. Well, most topics went to every candidate. Some were very specific, like asking State Representative Francesca Hong if she supports everything on the national DSA platform, which she's a member of.
I do not support the full platform of the national DSA, and I'm not endorsed by DSA National. What democratic socialism is a form of government that puts working class people first, that puts work first.
On the issue of property tax relief, everyone was asked if they would have signed the bipartisan bill rejected by the state Senate, including every Democrat, providing rebate checks, no tax on tips, and additional funding for public education. Only Milwaukee County Executive David Crawley said yes.
Were there things in this bill that I did not like? Absolutely. I love the fact that we were going to give relief to our schools and property tax relief, and there are other things in this bill that I didn't like. At the end of the day, we know that there are many Wisconsin families who are desperate. We should be focusing on how we lift them up and not playing politics.
This would have created a $2.9 billion deficit down the road, which our schools and our healthcare system and our local governments cannot afford. It also would have spent the surplus before it had even materialized.
When asked about data centers, everyone agreed regulations need to be in place, but to different degrees.
The state got into the data center game, and they put no guardrails on. And, you know, I have not called for a moratorium, but I have said that I would put a pause on the construction of new data centers, not for a year, but in the first 100 days.
This moratorium is necessary so that we can responsibly and put in enforcement mechanisms to protect communities.
One of the biggest shots of the night came from Mandela Barnes at Crawley for dropping out and then relaunching his campaign.
It's been mentioned that the county executive had his campaign resurrected by special interests in a dark room with people with their thumb on the scale. This means things will always be the same with that sort of leadership.
The winner of the August primary will take on Republican Tom Tiffany in November. In a statement tonight, Tiffany said in part, quote, "Tonight's debate confirmed that the Democrat primary has become a race to the far left. It is increasingly clear that socialist Francesca Hong, who has called to abolish the police, prisons, and the U.S. Senate, and says returning the surplus to taxpayers is irresponsible, will be the nominee," end quote. Still to come.